This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Lokwei. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. The UK Foreign Office slams the prosecution of a media tycoon in the former British colony of Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai found guilty on all charges under a national security law imposed by Beijing in 2020. A repeat and reaffirmation of Tokyo's position on Taiwan. Japan's foreign minister trying to dispel dispute with China with a spell-out of the long-standing position from 1972. China's foreign ministry slapping sanctions on a former chief of staff in Japan's self-defense forces, now serving as an honorary advisor to Taiwan's cabinet. China's push for real growth back in focus. The president warning officials against inflated data and vanity projects, with November's numbers pointing to patchy improvement. And also on East Asia Tonight, we explore the smuggling of high-end chips as China and the US battle it out for supremacy in artificial intelligence. Could high-tech location be the silver bullet? Former Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai has been convicted in a landmark national security trial ruling. He was found guilty of all charges of foreign collusion to endanger national security and of publishing seditious articles. The 78-year-old founder of the now defunct newspaper Apple Daily could be jailed for life. The widely expected verdict was delivered by 3 government-vetted judges in a trial conducted without a jury. The court ruled that Lai had never wavered in his intention to destabilize the Chinese Communist Party. Chief Executive John Lee welcomed the ruling, calling Lai's actions shameful and his intentions malicious.
法庭嘅定罪判決彰顯咗法律嘅正義，維護咗香港嘅核心價值。法律從不容許任何職業或者背景嘅人假借人權、民主同自由之名，公然傷害自己嘅國家同埋同胞。香港特區有責任維護國家安全。
Lai was arrested in 2020 under China's national security law enacted following the 2019 anti-government protests. The case has attracted international scrutiny, with both the US and the UK calling for the release of Lai, who is a British citizen. And for more, we're joined by CNA's Deborah Wong, reporting live in Hong Kong. Deborah, the court delivering that verdict, Mr. Lai, of course, as we just said, arrested since 2020, so it's years in the making now. What's next in this very long, drawn-out case?
So, Mr. Jimmy Lai's lawyers have said they have not decided whether or not they will be filing an appeal, but either way, they will need to submit any written mitigation by 4 p.m. on the 2nd of January. And Lai and his defense team, they are due back in court for a mitigation hearing, a 4-day mitigation hearing on January 12th. So if Mr. Lai indeed does decide to file an appeal, this case is expected to drag on even further. And depending on that outcome, prosecution may also decide to file their own appeal. Now, Mr. Lai was first detained in 2020. His trial concluded only in August this year. And because there were also multiple delays to court proceedings, this included reasons like a change in counsel, a bad weather at one point, and also Mr. Lai's own poor health. So either, whether all these will eventually draw out even further really depends on whether Mr. Lai eventually does intend to appeal, because this entire proceedings already took 156 days, and that might go on if he does decide to appeal.
Oh, Deborah, that verdict drawing reaction elsewhere in the world. Have you more details on that?
So Mr. Lai himself is a prominent businessman. His case is a very high-profile one, and it happened during the crackdown on dissent after the national security law was passed in Hong Kong. And that was really a litmus test at that point for Hong Kong's judicial independence as well as press freedom. Now, we did see many foreign representatives from various consulate generals in Hong Kong, including people from the UK, US, Canada, and the EU office as well. And they all said that they're here to observe the proceedings. Have a listen.
Jimmy Lai is a British national and is hugely important to the UK government. I'm here on the request of the Foreign Secretary to observe the verdict, and the Foreign Secretary will issue a statement later.
The EU and its member states are here to observe. We do trial observation around the world. That's something we do to signal our commitments to human rights and the rule of law. Hong Kong's courts are open for interested observers. That's a vital facet of the Hong Kong legal system, and we're here to signal our interest.
So Britain's Foreign Office just issued a statement on Mr. Lai, who is a UK citizen, saying that they condemn this, what they call a politically motivated prosecution. They say that Mr. Lai has been targeted by Chinese and Hong Kong authorities for exercising his freedom of expression. They've also called for his immediate release. Now, it's unclear what this would mean for UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's planned visit to China. Now, China had not confirmed his visit yet, but there were reports saying that he might visit China sometime in end January. So it's unclear what this would mean for that possibility. And likewise, again, US President Donald Trump, he had earlier advocated for Mr. Lai's release, saying that he would be pushing for it as part of the US-China negotiation trade deal. And how this would pan out or impact Mr. Trump's own visit to Beijing in April is also up in the air. But, Hong Kong authorities and Chinese authorities, they have hit back at claims about declining press freedom. They're saying that proceedings were transparent. In fact, they did point out to the fact that many international media were on site to observe the proceedings. Consulate officers were also on site to observe the proceedings. They denied that it was a clampdown on press freedom in this particular case, saying that Mr. Lai had, in fact, used his news outlet to actually stoke anger against Chinese and Hong Kong authorities. So let's hear more from the Chinese Foreign Affairs Ministry.
中方对个别国家公然诋毁抹黑香港司法表示强烈不满和坚决反对。香港特区司法机关依法履职尽责，维护法律权威，捍卫国家安全，合情、合理、合法，不容置喙。
So Hong Kong's Chief Executive John Lee is currently in Beijing to deliver his annual work report. Whether or not he discusses this with the central government is really something that we'll be keeping a very close eye on. Back to you.
Thanks. CNA's Deborah Wong there speaking to us from Hong Kong. And Taiwan's cabinet has refused to implement a law on the sharing of revenue. Opposition parties proposing the measure to alter how revenue from tax is split between central and local government.
然立法院的修法明显违反宪法第59条及宪法第70条的规范，不仅使得115年度就需要增加举债2646亿元，大幅增加政府支出，恐将严重排挤其他重大施政项目，也更侵犯了行政院施政决策以及提出预算的权利，违反宪法权力分立原则。
And we bring in CNA senior correspondent Victoria Deno. She's standing by inside the executive yuan, and of course, Taiwan's cabinet there in Taipei. And we just heard that from Taiwan's premier, who, of course, is the one who said he would not enact this opposition-controlled parliament past this plan earlier. What's the impact of this move? Why are critics calling it a constitutional crisis?
Well, the immediate impact is that the amendment simply won't take effect But the bigger impact is political, as critics are calling this a constitutional crisis. It's the first time a cabinet has openly rejected a law passed by Parliament. Now, the government argues that it has no choice, saying that the amendment would blow a big hole in public finances and force the central government to break its legal debt ceiling as soon as 2026. Now, that could directly affect a big-ticket spending, including next year's military budget. But this is part of a much bigger and ongoing issue. Now, the opposition holds a majority in Parliament, and for months, it has been pushing through bills the government strongly opposes. The DPP sees some of these moves as unconstitutional or overreaching. The opposition sees the government's pushback as undemocratic. Now, this tension has been building since the mass recall, where the ruling DPP lost political ground. Some analysts see this latest confrontation as the DPP trying to regain control, or at least stop losing more control of the legislature. And if Parliament wants to challenge the cabinet's refusal, it can file a no confidence vote, and that would ultimately lead to a snap election, depending on how the president responds. So the impact goes far beyond one law. It exposes a deep clash between the DPP government and the Parliament led by the opposition.
Oh, Victoria, apart from a snap election possibly happening, what else could happen if this stalemate continues?
Well, if this drags on, Taiwan could be heading into an even deeper political standoff. If lawmakers believe the premier is overstepping, they can launch a no-confidence vote. And if that passes, the president can either appoint a new premier or dissolve parliament and call for a snap election. The opposition is not keen on that, since they already hold the majority. But the ruling DPP may see it as an opportunity to win back parliament, especially after the mass recall battles earlier this year. Now, many see this whole confrontation as a kind of political rematch. On the fiscal front, the cabinet said the amendment would create a major shortfall for the central government, potentially affecting Taiwan's rising military budget for 2026 and beyond. So prolonged uncertainty makes it harder for Taipei to plan its defense spending at a time of rising regional tensions. President Lai is expected to stay firm, and he's framing this not only as a constitutional duty, but as a necessary to protect national finances and national security. So if neither side retreats, Taiwan could be heading towards the sharpest political showdown.
Thanks for that. Our CNA senior correspondent Victoria live from Taipei looking at this continued showdown between Taiwan's cabinet headed by its premier and, of course, the opposition-controlled parliament. Still on East Asia Tonight, HSBC's proposal to take over Hang Seng Bank gets an independent board committee's approval. And the maker of Roomba cannot sweep away its problems. iRobot, the company that revolutionized vacuuming, is going under.
Gusto ko po maging sikat na boksingero para matulungan ko yung pamilya pang mahal.
5 talented young Asians with big dreams.
ក្តីស្រមៃរបស់ខ្ញុំចង់ក្លាយជាវិស្វករម្នាក់ហើយក៏ចង់ក្លាយជាសិល្បករជាតិម្នាក់ដែលសម្ដែងនៅក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាផងដែរ
मुझे ये चाहिए कि जब वो बोले कि आपके जैसा रैप करना चाहिए और भी लड़कियां.
Representing Singapore means quite a lot to me because it has been a dream since I was a little kid.
Chị thì chị nhìn tranh của Long không dưới cái góc độ là Long bị tự kỷ hay gì, mà đấy là một người có tài.
Will they succeed? Limitless Season 2, Tuesdays on CNA.
Make the highlight of your Visit Malaysia year in 2026 the multi-UNESCO awarded state of Sarawak, Gateway to Borneo. Sarawak's culture, adventure, nature, food, and festivals promise to make your visit to Malaysia truly memorable.
We're in a chaotic moment.
Midnight later tonight here in Thailand, it's too little too late.
And I asked whether there's a political element to it. Nobody can exactly tell you why.
Look, things are never perfect when you're engaged in politics. Each one doing what each one wants.
So what's the United Nations doing amidst this world of supreme chaos? We're pushing for answers every night on Asia Tonight.
Future tech is here.
生活中呢，完全的离不开 AI 了。
整个的生产效率提升了200%。
As superpowers race to dominate the next wave of innovation, one critical force could determine who comes out ahead.
没有电力，你就不能支持这些高新技术的发展。
Is China leading the race for electrification?
China has already developed this tremendous amount of renewable energy supply.
Insight, Thursday on CNN.
This week on Singapore Hour, meet the bartending champs whose award-winning moves are matched only by their killer cocktails.
Side door is home away from home.
Guests always mention they feel something familiar.
And why going to hell could be the highlight of your weekend.
It's gory, dramatic, and surprisingly educational.
All this and more on Singapore Hour, Friday on CNA.
And we're back on East Asia Tonight. Henry joins us with the business news. Henry, the focus in China back on quality growth.
Yes, you're right, Wei Su. President Xi is calling out everything from inflated statistics to pointless mega projects. And Chinese President Xi Jinping is ramping up pressure on policymakers to pursue real and genuine growth. At last week's Central Economic Work Conference, he criticized inflated growth figures and vowed to crack down on projects designed solely to produce superficial results. People's Daily cited President Xi warning that officials who, quote, act recklessly and deploy resources without careful consideration will be held to account. President Xi reportedly used stark language to stress the need for quality economic gains. He listed examples of wrongdoing, including oversized industrial parks, the disorderly expansion of local exhibitions and forums, inflated statistics, and fake construction kickoffs. Experts say his comments highlight rising concern over the quality of China's GDP growth and the misuse of financial resources, especially as mounting local government debt limits Beijing's ability to spend. Latest economic data show China's growth engine sputtering in November, with all key indicators missing expectations. Industrial production increased by a pace of 4.8% on year, easing from the increase in October and missing expectations for a 5% jump. Retail sales climbed by a pace of 1.3% on year, missing forecast of 2.9%. And fixed asset investment for the first 11 months of the year dropped 2.6% on year, worsening its decline. Top officials are still confident this year's growth target of around 5% can be met, and analysts say China is likely to keep to the same target next year. Well, the years-long housing downturn also shows no signs of easing, adding to policymakers' woes as they brace for a potential default by property developer China Vanke. Home prices continue to slide in November, falling 2.8% year-on-year, a sharper drop than October's 2.6% decline. Vanke says it plans to improve on its proposal to delay a debt payment after creditors rejected its initial plan. It failed to get enough support to push back the payment by a year for its more than $280 million debt. It now has to pay the bond by the end of today or within a grace period of 5 business days. It could also come to a separate agreement to push back the deadline or face default. With Chinese equity markets feeling pressured by a string of weak data, the two mainland indices closing in the red, while Hang Seng Index also down by about 1.5%. Now, for more analysis, let's bring in Haozhou chief economist with Guotai Junan International and So one data point that really stands out today is retail sales, posting their weakest showing since China emerged from zero COVID curbs. And that's even despite the boost from the Double 11 shopping festival. So what's driving this softer than expected consumer response?
Hi, thank you for having me here. I think, in the first place, I have to say that the price pressure is still there in China. My wife, always bought a lot of stuff, from, the e-commerce platform. But I clearly see that the price has been falling, from year to year, from time to time. I think, that's one of the biggest issues here. The volume is still relatively good, but the price pressure, still on the table. I think, from this kind of perspective, we have to think that, China's so-called, deflation effort need to be continued in the future. But at least we can see that, basically China can still achieve 5% growth this year. Probably, China can achieve 5% next year as well. A few investment banks, have raised the China GDP, forecast for next year. So I think, for Q4, China can take a break. So wait for the kind of quality growth to coming up, as you mentioned in your program earlier. I think, in general, I'm not very concerned about, the consumption here, but the most important thing still, basically the price need to be maintained at a relatively higher level, at least stably. So from all this kind of perspective, the growth is still okay, but the problem or the focus will be turned to growth quality. So in this case, I think China need to work out a few measures to improve not only the growth quality, but also to make sure that the selling price can be relatively stable in the future.
Well, as you've mentioned, not only those investment banking, but also major institutions like IMF, World Bank, and Asia Development Bank, they also upgraded their growth forecasts for China, painting a fairly optimistic picture. But given today's disappointing data, not only retail sales, but also in factory floors and also fixed asset investment, so does that narrative still hold for the full-year growth?
That's not a concern for now, to be honest. I think, if you look at the overall growth picture, it remains resilient, especially from the external sector. China achieved, 1 trillion trade surplus for the whole year. Basically, the highest, in decades, also the highest since the pandemic. So I think, the short-term data disappointment means that, China is not is not intended to achieve the growth as much as possible. Basically, it's maintain relatively stable or stable pace of the economic growth here. So the optimistic picture by many investment banks as well as the the global organization means that people still believe that China still have a lot of room or potential to maintain 5% growth. I think if you look at the 15th five-year plan, probably in the next 5 years, China will still achieve at least the 4.5% growth as well. So I think growth itself will be here, and the technology and the domestic market or domestic demand will be the key focus or the key pillars for the economic to release its potential.
Mm-hmm. And also policymakers reiterated at the Central Economic Work Conference that boosting consumption and investment remains a top priority. So beyond the trade-in subsidies we've already seen, what additional policy tools could Beijing realistically deploy?
I think, we talk about, if we talk about realistic policies, basically policy rate cut, reserve requirement rate cut will be clearly on the table. And physical stimulus will be on the table. Basically, we are still expecting about 4% physical deficit target for next year. It will be released in next year's National People's Congress. And also, I think, we have to think about, overall China's industrial policies. A lot of local governments has been working hard to focus on the sector's approach or sector policies. So I think, a lot of monetary-related or physical-related stimulus will be related or combined with the industrial policies, which means that, for example, if you want to one local government can build up a EV kind of platform or EV kind of factory in some place, and the government will provide related subsidy policies. So I think if you look at overall China's policy, macro policy will be maybe not as important as before. The sector approach or sector policies will be more important or become the focus or highlights in the future.
Well, talking about different sectors, property sector stresses are back in focus again with reports that Vanke is scrambling to avoid a default. So if that situation deteriorates, what could the spillover effects be, both for the broader economy and for market sentiment?
I think, the investor actually not very concerned or worried about, the property problems because, after a few years deleveraging, it clearly shows that, there's no clear signal of, structural issues in the banking system or the economy. And basically, if the property prices, after the property prices drop by 30%, maybe in many cities, we can still see that the consumption is relatively stable. Of course, there's some kind of weakening signs of consumption or investment from a lot of indicators. But generally speaking, broadly speaking, I think, the macroeconomy still remains strong, and basically the resilience of the Chinese economy is out of many people's expectations. So I think, for me, basically the property story is the past story. Basically, we have to focus more on the high technology side and also domestic consumption side in the future.
All right, Hao, thank you so much indeed for your insights. Hao Zhou, Chief Economist with Guotai Junan International. Well, HSBC's proposal to buy out Hong Kong's Hang Seng Bank has won the backing of an independent board committee, which called the offer fair and reasonable. The committee is now urging minority shareholders to vote in favor of the deal. Under the deal, HSBC plans to buy the 36.5% of Hang Seng's shares it doesn't already own at a total of $13.6 billion. The move is part of HSBC's broader strategy to strengthen operations through targeted acquisitions while continuing to streamline its portfolio. Hang Seng Bank has faced pressure in recent years, largely due to its significant exposure to Hong Kong and mainland China's struggling property markets. Financial strain across the sector is expected to worsen, with bond maturities for debt-laden developers projected to surge nearly 70% next year. Founded in 1933, Hang Seng remains one of Hong Kong's largest banks, serving about 4 million customers through digital channels and more than 250 branches citywide. While shares in Hang Seng Bank closing up 0.33%, while HSBC 1.3% in the red. Well, once the company that brought robotic cleaning into global homes, iRobot is now facing its toughest moment yet. The American firm has filed for bankruptcy and proposed handing over control to its main Chinese supplier. The maker of the popular Roomba vacuum cleaners will be taken over by Shenzhen-based PCL Robotics. iRobot shot to prominence after launching the Roomba in 2002, which quickly became synonymous with autonomous vacuuming. And the company has since sold more than 40 million home robots. But earnings slumped after the pandemic as disruptions and cheaper rivals ate into its market share. New U.S. tariffs added further pressure with a 46% duty on imports from Vietnam, where iRobot manufactures for the American market, adding about $23 million in extra costs. The company was also weighed down by roughly $190 million in debt, much of it tied to a 2023 loan taken while its proposed acquisition by Amazon was under regulatory review. iRobot says it will continue operating as a going concern. It has assured staff that employment commitments will be honored and that vendors and suppliers will be paid in full during the restructuring process. And that's the latest in business. We're still back to you.
And thanks for that, Henry. And still ahead on East Asia tonight, more revelations at the insurrection trial of former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol. The prosecutor says he tried to provoke Pyongyang into an attack.
Biodiversity is booming, which is inviting for some local foragers and farmers who embrace edible wildlife.
We're the largest organic banana grower in Singapore.
This is a jam.
Amazing. So the mulberries are from the garden.
No, that's delicious.
Singapore is ramping up conservation efforts locally and across the region.
I really do love reptiles and finding out about them, so I really love my job.
The building must relate to the lives of the people.
目前还是一直要创新一些新的东西，我也不希望是人家把我看作是80岁的人。
There are those who dare to be different, who have made their mark in Singapore and beyond.
You have such big dreams, you want to change the world with your art.
Obviously, every fighter wants to win, so all you can do is to prepare yourself to win.
This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines. UK Foreign Office slams the prosecution of a media tycoon in the former British colony of Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai found guilty on all charges under a national security law imposed by Beijing in 2020. Japan's foreign minister tries to calm a diplomatic storm triggered by the prime minister, spelling out Tokyo's position on Taiwan. Beijing, though, stepping up the pressure, slapping sanctions on a former chief of staff in Japan's self-defense forces. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese proposing tougher national gun laws after yesterday's deadly mass shooting at Sydney's Bondi Beach. Looking at that story now, the Prime Minister proposing tougher national gun laws a day after that attack at Bondi Beach. Police revealing the shooting was carried out by a father and son duo who owned multiple firearms. They targeted a Jewish event marking Hanukkah, killing 15 people and injuring some 40 others.
What we saw yesterday was an act of pure evil, an act of terror, an act of anti-Semitism, an attack on the first day of Hanukkah targeted at the Jewish community. A dark day in Australia's history on what should have been a day of light.
Mr. Albanese laying flowers at a site near the crime scene and ordering flags to be flown at half-mast nationwide. This is Australia's worst mass shooting since the Port Arthur incident 3 decades ago, in which 35 people were killed. One of the shooters, the 50-year-old father, was killed. His 24-year-old son is in hospital and is expected to face criminal charges. Drone footage shows one of them during the attack on a bridge overlooking Bondi Beach. Police say the father was a licensed gun owner and had 6 firearms. The Premier of New South Wales wants to make it more difficult to own what he calls weapons of mass destruction.
If you're not a farmer, if you're not involved in agriculture, why do you need these massive weapons that put the public in danger and make life dangerous and difficult for New South Wales Police?
Natasha Gutierrez has more on how Australians are viewing this tragedy and its impact on religious communities. She filed this report for CNA from Bondi Beach in Sydney.
Various religious groups, both locally and globally, world leaders have all come out and criticized and condemned these attacks. And even here, though, the backlash we're seeing has come more from the Jewish community towards the Albanese government. They feel that he didn't adequately address what they have said have been rising anti-Semitic attitudes in Australia. Since the beginning of this year to September, Australia has seen more than 1,600 anti-Jewish incidents, which is 3 times more than any annual tally since the start of the Gaza war. And so some Jewish community leaders feel that had that been addressed, perhaps this attack could have been prevented. I was, however, speaking to 2 young Muslim men, and they actually expressed some fear that in the coming days of possible rising anti-Muslim attitudes. However, they did also raise that they were quite glad to find out that the bystander who attacked one of the gunmen who tackled him and prevented him from killing more people was Muslim. One of the common conversations that keep coming up is about Ahmed Al-Ahmed, and he is the man who has been widely seen in a video that's now gone viral across the world for tackling the gunman, one of the gunmen from behind. What do we know about him? He is 43 years old, the father of two young daughters, 6 and 3. He owns a fruit shop, and he was in Bondi having coffee with a friend when he saw the gunman, and he decided to attack him from behind, tackle him, and he's now being hailed a hero. A lot of Australians have been praying for him, have been hoping for his recovery, because he is now in hospital after having been shot 4 to 5 times on the shoulder. His parents are also here from Syria. Ahmed Al-Ahmed had moved to Australia in 2006 from Syria, but now he really is widely popular here. In fact, a fundraiser in his honor to help him with his recovery has now reached $550,000 in just 12 hours.
Singapore's Prime Minister Lawrence Wong has expressed his condolences to Australia's Prime Minister. Mr. Wong adds that Singapore stands firmly with Australia in solidarity and support. He says he was deeply saddened, calling it senseless violence that struck a place cherished by Australians and visitors alike, including many Singaporeans. He adds that Singapore strongly condemns the act of terrorism. Such acts, he says, have no place in both societies and undermine peace and security. Police in Japan have arrested a man over the stabbing of 2 people at an entertainment complex housing a female pop group. Both victims are in stable condition with non-life-threatening injuries. The attack took place in the southern city of Fukuoka at a stadium and a nearby facility where the band HK248 was due to meet their fans online. The 30-year-old male suspect admitted to stabbing an event worker after staff reportedly told him to leave a restricted area. The assailant then allegedly attacked a woman attending an event in the stadium. The suspect later called the police from a payphone to report the incident before making his confession. The band's management says all group members were evacuated and the meet and greet session was cancelled. Japan's foreign minister has spelled out Tokyo's position on Taiwan in an attempt to ease tensions with China. The spat has been brewing for more than a month after Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi suggested that Tokyo could respond militarily if China attacked Taiwan. Toshimitsu Motegi spoke in Parliament, reiterating the 1972 Joint Communique, in which Japan expresses respect for China's position on Taiwan. But he did not read out the clause reflecting Beijing's stand that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China, even though Beijing has repeatedly urged Tokyo to restate the wording in full. The fallout is growing, China urging its nationals not to visit Japan, and that has hit Japanese tourism. There's also been more Chinese military activity near Japan, including an alleged radar lock on Japanese aircraft and joint drills with Russia. Not helping those tensions, China imposing sanctions on the former chief of staff of Japan's self-defense forces. Shigeru Iwasaki was named an honorary advisor to Taiwan's executive yuan, that's the cabinet, in March. That's a move triggering protests from China, which accused the retired 4-star general of violating the One China principle and colluding with Taiwan's separatist forces. Sanctions will freeze his assets within China and ban organizations and individuals in the country from engaging with Mr. Iwasaki. He will also be barred from entering mainland China, Hong Kong or Macau. And a special prosecutor in Seoul says former President Yoon Suk-yeol tried to provoke North Korea into a military clash to justify imposing martial law and to sideline his political opponents. The special counsel team says they have uncovered evidence of what they call an elaborate scheme led by Yoon and then Defense Minister Kim Yong-hun, which started in October 2023. Investigators say the goal was to suspend the National Assembly and replace it with an emergency legislative body under presidential control.
비상계엄을 선포할 명분을 만들기 위해 비정상적 군사작전을 통해 북한의 무력 도발을 유인하였으나 북한이 군사적으로 대응하지 않아 실패하였고.
Mr. Cho's team says Yoon went so far as to send South Korean drones into North Korea to try to trigger a military response that would then legitimize a crackdown at home. The probe also found that Yoon tried to cast his party's defeat in last year's general election as electoral fraud by so-called anti-state forces. Yoon has already been indicted on insurrection-related charges for his short-lived imposition of martial law last December. A court separately sentenced a retired General No Sang-won to 2 years in prison for his role in connection to the imposition of martial law. He had collected personal information of the military's intelligence officers as part of a move to investigate election fraud allegations. No was also charged for accepting cash and gift certificates from 2 military personnel in exchange for help in their promotions. Japan plans to set up a new public-private economic security council as early as next year to look into supply chains for certain critical products such as semiconductors. According to Nikkei Asia, the council will make sure government policy reflects what corporations are seeing on the ground. What is unusual is that those from the private sector will bear the same level of confidentiality required of government employees. This is so that sensitive information can move freely between the two sides without leaks. A source in the Cabinet Secretariat told Nikkei Asia that, unlike diplomacy or defense, matters on economic security must tap heavily on those in the private sector. Still ahead on East Asia tonight, strong demand for chips to power artificial intelligence farms, prompting the proliferation of smuggling networks. Are there ways to curb this rising problem? Insights in just a moment when we speak with an expert.
如果我们这些老一辈的hawkers他们没有人可以传下去，我觉得这个菜肴蛋的生会不见啊。
Hawker trade is not just business. It is the love of cooking to feed the community, and I feel that this is very important.
有一种本地的声音是觉得好像有外国人在抢他们的机会了。对于我来说，我并没觉得自己是在抢夺什么机会，我是在提供更多的选择。
I notice a lot of hawkers who are struggling. The main problem is retention. I'm very confident to say that our job role is one of the highest paid in the hawker business.
Does using a machine take away the soul of the hawker food? No. No, it doesn't.
If we just open our mind to the possibilities of building a new culture, which is still original to Singapore, because Singapore is a melting pot, right?
New Stirrings, 3-part series, premieres 27th December on CNA.
In the morning as Asia wakes up to a new day. Get up to speed with major events shaping lives in the region and other parts of the world.
Putting things in perspective with eye-opening reports and expert analysis as a new era of global politics breeds power struggles and shifting alliances.
We get to the heart of the matter and take stock of the issues you're invested in with on-the-ground reports and wall-to-wall coverage. Viewing it all from a regional lens because we put Asia first.
This is for those who move, those who don't wait for things to happen. They make them happen. They don't follow maps. They draw them and build what isn't there. They don't call it instinct. They call it Tuesday.
At Standard Chartered, we're here for those who never stand still, who want trusted expertise in the world's most dynamic markets.
Now is your time.
Future tech is here.
生活中呢，完全的离不开 AI 了。
整个的生产效率提升了200%。
As superpowers race to dominate the next wave of innovation, one critical force could determine who comes out ahead.
没有电力，你就不能支持这些高新技术的发展。
Is China leading the race for electrification?
China has already developed this tremendous amount of renewable energy supply.
Insight, Thursday on CNN.
AI chips are the new contraband. Washington has been tightening export controls since 2022 under the Biden administration. A fierce demand for high-end NVIDIA processors like the H100 and H200 has fed a proliferation of smuggling networks in China. U.S. prosecutors say one network alone tried to move about $160 million worth of these chips to China using shell companies. Our chips are shipped to U.S. warehouses where NVIDIA labels were peeled off and replaced with fake labels before re-export. A separate network allegedly bought restricted NVIDIA GPUs, that's graphic processing units, in the U.S. and then rerouted them through Malaysia into China. Paperwork was tweaked, concealing the real destination. Now, that is why NVIDIA is trying to tag where its chips are headed. It's rolling out location verification tech that could indicate roughly where chips are operating. The feature will be available on its latest Blackwell chips. And for more, we have Eric Grunewald. He's researcher at the Institute for AI Policy and Strategy. He's speaking to us from Berlin. Mr. Grunewald, we look to tech. So in this case, identification location technology. Before it can actually do the job, could you explain to us how it might actually work?
Sure. So first thing I should note is that NVIDIA has announced that it will implement some kind of location verification technology. We don't know yet exactly the details of how it will work. However, it has been reported that it will use something called ping-based location verification. And this is a way of doing location verification that has been proposed previously, for example, as part of the Chip Security Act. And the way that works is that you have a trusted server in a known location, for example, in Singapore, and this server is able to communicate with the AI chips. So the server can send a message to an AI chip and wait for a reply and measure the time that that takes. And if the reply is very fast, you know that the chip is nearby. So you might know that the chip is in Singapore, for example. Whereas if the reply takes a long time, you cannot rule out the fact that the chip might be in, for example, China. And that works because of the laws of physics and the speed of light. You just know that as a fact. And that has some advantages over some other location verification technologies, such as GPS tracking. So like one advantage is that you have relatively privacy-preserving technology where you don't know exactly where the coordinates of the chip. You just know that it's not in China. And two, it's very hard for adversaries to sort of cheat or circumvent this technology.
But as you say, it is still a rough estimate. So you may know where it definitely is not, but you may not actually know where it actually is. And apart from, it would require, as you say, the Chip Security Act actually going through so that companies are mandated to actually use this, to deploy this technology. But you also need follow-up, you need implementation, you need investigation, and all this would come at cost or a budget that the US government at this point may not even have.
That's right, yeah. So NVIDIA's proposed mechanism would be opt-in. And so obviously that's not very useful if the smuggler can simply opt out. And the way for this to be useful, the way it would have to work is that someone, for example, the US government, but it could also be an independent third-party verifier, would periodically check maybe a subset of the chips and ask the owners of the chips to verify that those chips are not in China. And thanks to the technology, you can do that reliably. And if some chips have been smuggled, what would most likely happen is that you simply cannot get in touch of the owners of those chips. And then, yes, you would need to follow up with traditional enforcement methods like doing an on-site inspection and so on. But the advantage of this is that at least you know which chips have gone dark, so to say, whereas currently no one, NVIDIA doesn't know, the US government doesn't know, I certainly don't know where these chips going dark end up, or even how many chips are going dark. The best we have is very rough estimates of how many chips are smuggled each year. So it would provide a lot of informational value, but For it to really end smuggling, you would need to pair it with strong enforcement measures as well. Yeah.
And we'll get to that in a moment. This is in the headlines because just last week we had the charging of 2 men, and prior to that, a Texas businessman admitting to guilt, tens of millions of dollars of chips smuggled into China. But reports suggest that this is not because of very effective investigation so much as a voluntary leak, volunteering, in fact, this information to U.S. authorities. So if you depend on this, investigations, it is not a very positive outlook we might have for investigations being able to uncover cases which we've just seen.
Yeah, that's right. The details around this case are not entirely clear, but it seems to have been the result of a tip to the U.S. authorities. In general, I think the number of unknown smuggling cases is just very large relative to the number of caught smugglers, where U.S. authorities, so the agency that's in charge of administering and enforcing export controls in the U.S., the Bureau of Industry and Security, has very little resources and simply cannot go and look at each individual case of an export. So they end up relying on either customs in the U.S. catching anomalous shipments or reports like this. And that's why you need that's why technologies like location verification is very useful, because it's quite a cheap way as an alternative to doing physical on-site inspections, sending a person into the data center to see if the chips are still there.
I think we've had U.S. Attorney General for the Southern District of Texas coming out, I think, criticizing, in fact, and I take this slightly out of context, criticizing the sale of the proposed sale of H200 chips to approved companies in China. He's saying these chips are the building blocks of AI security and are integral to modern military applications. So the importance of chips like that, given how large a part they play in increasingly AI-centered economy, military, why is more effort not going into tackling what are clearly large smuggling operations? A final question.
Yeah, that is a good question. My sense is that is partly due to inertia. So 5 years ago, the Bureau of Industry and Security had much fewer responsibilities. So its small budget of about 200 million per year was mostly adequate. Since then, it has had to deal not just with these vast export controls on AI chips and the tooling to make the AI chips as well, but also with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and all the diversion that happens there. And the agency is just not equipped to handle these massively increased responsibilities. Its budgets the past 5 to 10 years for enforcement activities has barely increased, and if adjusting for inflation has in fact decreased. And it's just very hard to increase the budget of any government agencies in the US because of the political gridlock.
Oh, thanks for taking time to join us this evening, Mr. Eric Grunewald, researcher at the Institute for AI Policy and Strategy. Singapore and China have signed a record 27 agreements at the Joint Council for Bilateral Cooperation, or the JCBC, held in China's Chongqing municipality. Forum is their highest bilateral platform. Singapore's Deputy Prime Minister Gan Kim Yong says these reaffirm how both sides are committed to work together in the spirit of mutual trust and respect. The deals deepen collaboration across areas like the green economy, food security, as well as youth and sports. Amongst them, one that allows Singaporeans traveling to China to open and top up Chinese yuan into their digital wallets to make payments in China. Mr. Gan and his JCBC co-chair, Chinese Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang, says the initiatives draw on opportunities in emerging areas to benefit both sides and contribute to regional prosperity. It also comes as Singapore and China mark 35 years of diplomatic ties.
This year's JCBC is taking place as countries worldwide face an uncertain geopolitical environment, rapid technological changes, and global economic headwinds. Each of our two countries have been making plans to navigate this uncertain future. It is therefore all the more important for Singapore and China to continue to find ways to cooperate, anticipating challenges and capitalizing on new opportunities for our businesses and our peoples.
面向未来，中兴作为文化相通、利益相融的发展伙伴，要进一步的落实两国领导人重要共识，加强团结协作，坚定维护共同利益，继续用好中兴双边合作机制，会这样一个管总的平台。
This Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Headlines anytime at CNA.Asia, plus on Facebook and YouTube.